I am Jordan, and we would like to thank all of you, patrons, by giving you this bonus episode.
Yes, thank you for listening. We appreciate it.
So what are you going to tell us about today, Merisa?
Today I'm going to be talking about Elmer McCurdy. He was an American bank and train robber who was killed in a shootout with police after robbing a Katy train in Oklahoma in October 1911. But his story didn't end there. I'll get into that in just a moment. McCurdy was born in Washington, Maine on January 1st, 1880. He was born to a 17-year-old named Sadie McCurdy. She was unmarried at the time of his birth, and she didn't know who his father was. To save her the embarrassment of raising an illegitimate child, her brother George and his wife Helen adopted Elmer. After George died of tuberculosis in 1890, Sadie ended up telling Elmer that she was his mother and that she didn't know who his biological father was. So this news disturbed McCurdy, who grew resentful and became unruly and rebellious. So as a teenager, he started to drink heavily because of it. And then that would continue throughout his life. So he eventually went to go live with his grandfather, and he became an apprentice plumber. And he was reported to be a competent worker and kind of lived comfortably because he was good at what he was doing. But then the economy took a downturn in 1898, so he lost his job. In August 1900, his mom died of a ruptured ulcer, and then his grandfather died.
Man.
Yeah. So he was kind of left with nobody.
Yeah.
So he left Maine, and he was drifting around the eastern coast of United States. And he was just working odd jobs as a miner or a plumber. But he couldn't hold a job down for too long because he was an alcoholic. So he'd always lose his job because of that.
And he was a miner.
Okay, and then he eventually made his way down to Kansas, where he worked as a plumber. And then in 1907, he joined the United States Army. And while he was in the Army, he was taught how to use a machine gun, as well as to use nitroglycerin for demolition purposes. And this is going to come in handy in a little bit. He was honorably discharged on November 7th, 1910. He then made his way back to St. Joseph, Kansas, where he met up with his old Army friend. And that's where they started to concoct their plan to rob something, because they got arrested. Because they had chisels, hacksaws, funnels for nitroglycerin, and gunpowder, and money sacks. So I'm not sure what they were going to go after, either a train or a bank, but...
Or Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah. So then when he went before the judge, him and his friend told the judge that all of these items weren't for burglary purposes, but they were doing it because they were trying to invent a foot-operated machine gun.
What?
Yeah.
That's the excuse.
Yeah, it worked because they were found not guilty in 1911, and they were let go.
You sure this isn't a cartoon that Robert Rodriguez directed?
He directed one?
Something about a girl with a machine gun leg.
Oh.
It seems fake. So like those sacks with the dollar signs on it.
That's what I
sacks.
imagined when they said money sacks. How do you know it's a sack for money?
And hamburger costumes. And yeah, it sounds ridiculous, but continue, sorry.
Okay, after his release, his short-lived career as a bank robber and train robber began, but he wasn't very good at it.
Yeah, obviously.
McCurdy tried using his training with nitroglycerin into his robberies, but it didn't always work out as you'd think, because you need to actually know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So he would always use too much or too little. So on one robbery, they were trying to rob the Iron Mountain, Missouri Pacific train, and they heard that it contained $4,000, right? So they located the safe. They put nitroglycerin on the safe's door, but he used too much. So when the safe was destroyed, so was the majority of the money inside the safe. So instead of getting $4,000, they just managed to get $450 in silver coins.
Yeah, don't you usually start with a little bit and then build your way up to a lot?
Yeah, he didn't know what he was doing. And then in September 1911, McCurdy and two other men robbed the Citizens Bank in Kansas. And after spending 2 hours breaking through the bank wall with a hammer, McCurdy placed a nitroglycerin charge around the door of the bank's outer vault. So the blast blew the vault door open, destroying the interior, but it didn't damage the safe inside.
They're hammering the wall for 2 hours and they got that nitroglycerin, more than they need. Wouldn't he just put a small amount on the wall, blow that up?
You would think.
Be in within 10 minutes and then use the other too much nitroglycerin to... Okay. Well, it's all trial and error, it seems. He's learning as he goes, right?
So then he tried to open the safe door, but the nitroglycerin, it didn't ignite. So they were kind of just left there. And there was $150 in coins that were left in a tray outside the safe. So they just took that and left.
Might as well, right?
Got to get something. So on his final robbery, it took place on October 4th, 1911. Him and two friends were planning to rob a Katy train after hearing that it had $400,000 in cash. However, the men mistakenly stopped a passenger train instead. So instead of getting $400,000, they only managed to take $46 from the mail clerk.
That is an insane amount. $400,000 now.
Is a lie, yeah.
This is 1911.
Yeah.
That's insane. And it's all on one train. Let's put all of our... That's crazy. So he went on a passenger train because he couldn't tell the difference.
I guess he couldn't.
One's got windows and people looking out of it, and the other one's got steel cages.
So they got $46.
46.
Yep. So he was disappointed, and he went back to hiding in some hay shed that they had found. And by this time, he was also ill with tuberculosis, mild case of pneumonia, and trichinosis.
What's that?
Trichinosis is a parasitic disease. It's caused by roundworms, and they invade your insides.
Oh.
And they cause diarrhea and abdominal pain and vomiting.
That's not something you need when you're robbing trains. Hurry up, I got diarrhea.
So unbeknownst to McCurdy, he had been implicated in the robbery, and a $2,000 reward for his capture was issued. In the early morning hours of October 7th, a posse of 3 sheriffs, brothers Bob and Stringer Fenton, and Dick Wallace. Why are you laughing?
It seems like it's a made-up story.
They tracked McCurdy to the hay shed he was using by using bloodhounds. So they surrounded the shed and they're waiting till daylight. And I'm assuming McCurdy saw them because he's the one that started shooting at them first. So they were kind of taken back by that. But then McCurdy was killed by a single gunshot wound to the chest. So McCurdy's body was taken to the Undertaker in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And the Undertaker's name was Joseph L. Johnson, and he was also the owner. And at that time, they used an arsenic-based preservative. And it's because when they didn't know who this person's family was, they wanted to preserve the body so when the family is notified, the family can identify the body. So he was embalmed with that, and he waited for people to come and claim the body. But then nobody came. And he wanted to get paid for his services that he had done. So to make up that lost revenue, he shaved the face of McCurdy and dressed him in street clothes and put a gun next to him and kind of stood him upright in a corner in the funeral home. Mm-hmm. And he charged people a nickel to come view the bandit who wouldn't give up.
So they just made him into like a...
sideshow, yeah.
Yeah, like a mannequin of himself.
So people would come and it got real popular. It got so popular that carnival promoters were calling Johnson to see if they could buy his corpse, McCurdys Corpse.
Okay.
But he refused. He was waiting for his next of kin. On October 6, 1916, a man calling himself Aver contacted Joseph Johnson, claiming to be Elmer McCurdy's long-lost brother from California. And Aver had already contacted the sheriff and a lawyer to get permission to transfer the body to San Francisco for proper burial. And then the following day, Aver arrived at the Johnson funeral home with another man calling himself Wayne, who also claimed to be McCurdy's brother. So Johnson released the body to the men, who then put him on a train that was supposed to go to San Francisco, but instead it was shipped to Arkansas City, Kansas. And the men who claimed to be McCurdy's long-lost brothers were in fact James and Charles Patterson. James Patterson was the owner of the Great Patterson Carnival shows, a traveling carnival. So the McCurdys Corpse would be featured in Patterson's traveling carnival as the outlaw who would never be captured alive, until 1922 when Patterson sold his operation to Louis Sonny. Louis Sonny used McCurdys Corpse in his traveling Museum of Crime show, which featured wax replicas of famous outlaws such as Bill Doolin and Jesse James. So those were just replicas. They weren't actually bodies, but McCurdys was an actual corpse. And remember, he had been embalmed, so it wasn't like it was like a decaying corpse. So after Louis Sonny died in 1949, the corpse was placed in a storage in a Los Angeles warehouse. And in 1964, Sonny's son Dan, It's Dan. He lent the corpse to a filmmaker named David F. Friedman. It eventually made a brief appearance in Friedman's 1967 film, She Freak.
Which can now be found on...
Dan Sonny sold the body along with other wax figures for $10,000 to Spoonie Singh, the owner of the Hollywood Wax Museum. Singh then sold it to Ed Lurch, who was part owner of the Pike, which was an amusement zone in Long Beach, California. By 1976, McCurdys Corpse was hanging in the Laugh in the Dark Funhouse exhibit at the Pike. So they had him hanging from his neck.
Wow.
As like a decoration. On December 8, 1976, the production crew of the television show The $6 Million Man, and they were doing scenes for the Carnival of Spies episode at the Pike. During the shoot, the prop man moved what he thought was a wax mannequin that was hanging from the gallows.
Because why would you think otherwise?
Exactly. Why would you think this is a real person? When the mannequin's arm broke off, a human bone and muscle tissue were visible. So then that freaked everybody out because they're like, what the hell is this? So the police were called and the mummified corpse was taken to the Los Angeles coroner's office. And that's where they did an autopsy and they determined that the body was that of a human male who had died of a gunshot wound to the chest. And he had been covered in wax and had been covered in layers of phosphorus paint. And they could actually, when they did the autopsy, they could actually still see the tuberculosis in his lungs.
Wow.
So he was really well preserved.
I was just thinking that, yeah. That's how you do it. Don't use embalming fluid, just use wax and paint.
So inside of his mouth, there was a 1924 penny and a ticket stub that had the address of 140 West Pike, Sideshow, and Louis Sonny's Museum of Crime. The investigators were able to track who he bought this from and then go back from there. And then they eventually found out that it was McCurdy. And then on April 22nd, 1977, he was laid to rest in Oklahoma. And to make sure his body was not stolen, they put 2 feet of concrete over his casket. And he was actually laid to rest next to other outlaws, such as Bill Doolin. But yeah, that's crazy, right?
That is insane. Yeah. The thing that stuck with me was people in theater, and I've done theater, and just to think that there's a corpse hanging from a noose.
I know.
In the back. Then I'm thinking like his head didn't come off with all that body weight.
Mm-hmm.
The wax, the paint, all that weight on the clothing, and his head still holding up.
Yep.
It's insane. It didn't seem real. None of the stories seemed real. From his origin story, him being alive and him being dead were both ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, even alive, he had a ridiculous story. And then after death, it just got more ridiculous.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
No problem. It was one of the most interesting stories I found, and I wanted to share it with the Patreon subscribers. And you're doing your episode next week, correct?
I am. So I've got a special event picked out for you. Listen for our early release. And then after that, you'll get the next bonus episode. Thank you once again for being patrons.
Bye.
Bye.